Hello guys, and welcome to another one of my videos. As you can see from the image, today we're going to be covering the circulatory system, and we're going to be looking at the heart, blood vessels, etc. So I'm going to start off obviously by showing you one of the more complicated and difficult parts of the circulatory system, which is obviously the heart. As you can see, I've attempted to draw the heart to my best ability, which isn't very good, but hopefully I'm going to help to explain it to you. Just before I rub it off, the red means oxygenated, because obviously there's more oxygen, and the green, which is the best colour I could find for it, means deoxygenated, which obviously means it doesn't have as much oxygen, or has no oxygen at all. So I'm going to rub those off now. Okay. So, let's begin by labelling the parts of the heart. Okay, so when labelling the heart, it can be very difficult. You may be given slightly different diagrams, and it may be slightly difficult. So I'm going to try and give you some tips as to having an idea of which part is which on the diagram. So to begin with, as you can see, we have this part at the top here, this red sort of tube, okay, and it's got three kind of dots, which are sort of vessels, okay, or which are sort of vessels. So basically these three dots, when you see that usually indicates to you that it's the aorta, okay? It's called the aorta. Okay? And what the aorta does is the aorta is the part of the heart which pumps blood to the rest of the body, okay? So just remember, look out for those three dots and you should be fine. Okay, so next, on this side, we have what's known as the atrium. Okay, this little bit here is the atrium. But this bit on this side is, in fact, the right atrium. Let me get that right for a second. Sorry, it's the left atrium. Let me correct myself right. So this is the left atrium here, okay? Sorry about that, I just had a little bit confusing because what happens is this side is called the left instead of the right, even though when you're looking at it, it may appear the right side of you, and that's because when you're performing surgeries as a doctor, it will appear differently to you. So basically, just remember when you're looking at a heart, it's the opposite side to what it appears to you, which is why I found it confusing. So this side here is in fact called the left side instead of the right, okay? That's called the left side, and obviously this side over here is called the right side, okay? So, as I was saying, this little section here is called the atrium. So just remember, when looking for the atrium, look for a small part of the heart that's perhaps kind of locked off by two sort of walls here. Although it looks different, the right atrium, sorry, looks slightly different to the left atrium, and it may look like this, or it may look like this. As I said, this is very confusing to explain because the heart can appear in many different forms on a test paper. So that's the atrium on the right side of the heart. And I am sorry if I get my right and my left confused whilst I'm explaining this, please forgive me. So, moving on, another important part of the heart is the ventricle. So you have a left and a right ventricle again. Now the ventricle is the big part of the heart. So remember, when looking for the ventricle, look for a massive open space in the diagram of the heart, at the bottom of the heart. So these two areas here are both of the ventricles. So this is the right ventricle. Apologise for my handwriting. And this is the left ventricle. Okay? They both perform roughly the same roles, by the way, so don't try and get that confused, but I'll explain that in a minute. So, another part of the heart you may want to know, or you will need to know, is the pulmonary vein and artery, okay? Now, they're not obviously called the left and the right pulmonary vein or artery, so you may need to go over this a bit more. The pulmonary vein can be found on this diagram here, which is going to look very confusing to you because you'd expect it to be one of these pipes, and usually on a diagram it probably is. So hopefully you won't be expected to label the pulmonary vein, but if you are, it's here. I'll probably spell this wrong, so let me just check my spelling on that. Pulmonary vein, okay? The pulmonary vein goes to the left side of the heart, and the reason it goes there is because it's just been to the lungs, and therefore it's picked up some oxygen from the lungs, because obviously that's where you're breathing in and gaining oxygen, so therefore it wants to go to the oxygenated side. The pulmonary one is, of course, the pulmonary artery, which carries blood from the heart to the lungs so that it can get oxygenated, and obviously it's an artery because it goes away from the heart. Don't assume arteries are always oxygenated, because they're not. Arteries just something that goes away from the heart. So therefore this carries blood to get oxygenated, and where it can be labelled on this specific diagram is here, because it carries it from this this right side, this deoxygenated blood, it's carrying it to the heart. So that's the pulmonary artery. Sorry if this isn't making much sense. I know it's very confusing because there's a lot to label. Hopefully you won't be expected to label it, but this is just in case you are. And the last thing you might get is valves. Now I can label a valve for you here. And what valves do is they basically ensure that oxygen, or blood, sorry, goes in the right direction and doesn't leak out of the heart. Okay, so now these are the points which you want to look for, obviously. The last one is not on a particular side, so I'm going to label it in black, and it's called the septum, or the septum. Now, there's a lot of septums in your body. A septum is basically separating tissue. So you can find it here, or you can find it in your nose, you have separating tissue. So that's the septum. Just remember, septum is separating tissue. Both begin with S. Right. Now, lastly, before I rub out this and explain to you the order which the blood goes through in the heart, I'm going to explain to you why this side, so the left side, is bigger than the right side. Now the left side is bigger than the right side because the left side has oxygenated blood, and therefore it's got actually more blood in it, so it needs more room because it's got more oxygen, and B, it needs to pump it around the whole body through the aorta, so therefore it needs to contract more, so therefore it needs more muscle, it needs more space to push it and create massive pressure, and that's why that's bigger. Okay, so I hope that part has helped. I know it's very confusing, and I know it may not make a lot of sense to you because there's a lot to label, and it can come in many different forms, but hopefully that's at least giving you some kind of idea of the heart. So I'm now going to go over the order that the blood goes through in the heart in order to get around the body. Okay. So I'd just like to start by apologising. I just realised in my last diagram I didn't label the vena cava, but it's basically the other big tube that carries blood from the body. So when you've got the aorta with the 3 dots, the other big tube is the supravena cava. I apologise for that. So when you've got blood coming from the body, it first comes through the aorta, sorry, not the aorta, the vena cava, okay, which is spelled like this. Okay, and that brings all the blood from the body into the right side of the heart. Okay, so this is all the right. Okay. Okay, so it comes through into the vena cava, and then from the vena cava, the blood will first enter the right atrium, okay? And it always enters the atrium first. Okay? So it goes into the right from the vena cava to the right atrium. So it enters the smaller part first. Now what will then happen is the right atrium will contract. It will push the blood out of it when it gets full. And then it will and then it will push this blood into the right ventricle. Okay? Now remember, the right ventricle is the larger part. So the way you can remember this is if it goes from smaller to larger. Okay? Now the right ventricle basically does the same thing, and it contracts and pushes blood. Okay? Now the right ventricle will push the blood into the pulmonary, the pulmonary artery. Now the reason it will do that is because, remember, this blood is trying to get oxygenated, I can never say that, trying to get oxygenated, so it wants to go to the pulmonary artery, because this pulmonary artery will take the blood to the lungs where it can gain oxygen, okay? So this pulmonary artery will then go to the lungs. Ooh. Okay? And that's sort of the middle of our process. Okay, so after that, it's going to enter the left. Now in order to enter the left, it has to go through the pulmonary vein, because remember, it's just come from the lungs, so it comes from the pulmonary vein. So anything that says pulmonary in it is to do with the lungs. So it will therefore come through the pulmonary vein, because a vein goes towards the heart. Okay? And now we're in the left side of the heart, because the left side carries the oxygenated blood. So, after it has entered the pulmonary vein, it will then, again, remember, we start with the atrium, so it will then go into the left atrium this time. And the left atrium will do just the same as the right atrium did. It will contract and it will push blood into the left ventricle. Now after it's in the left ventricle will need to contract a lot, because it's about to push blood all the way around the body. Okay, so that's the left ventricle's function with its contraction. Okay, so it will contract and it will push it through the aorta. And the aorta will carry the blood all the way around the body. So it will go through the aorta to then go all the way around the body. So let's just go through this order again. So it first comes through the vena cava, deoxygenated from the rest of the body. The vena cava will then transfer the blood into the right atrium. Remember, it's right, not left. Don't get these confused. You've just got to keep reminding yourself that right means deoxygenated. There's no simple way to remember this. And then, from the right atrium, it will contract and it will push it into the right ventricle. The right ventricle will then contract again and push it into the pulmonary artery. Remember, artery goes away from the heart into the lungs, because pulmonary means lungs, basically. And then, obviously, at the lungs it will get oxygenated, and then from the lungs it will go through the pulmonary vein, because veins go towards the heart, and obviously, as I said, pulmonary is to do with the lungs. We're then in the left side of the heart, and it will enter the left atrium. The left atrium will contract and it will push it into the ventricle, and then it goes into the aorta after the left ventricle does a massive contraction to push it around the whole body, and it will go through the aorta. Again, I know this is very complicated. I am doing my best to explain this. You may be wondering what three really odd looking images are doing on my board. This is my attempt to draw the three types of vessels that carry blood, okay? and I'm just going to explain these to you as the last part of my video. So the first one we have at the top is the artery. Now obviously the artery normally will always carry blood from the heart, and it normally carries oxygenated blood. Now because it's carrying it from the heart, it therefore needs to get it all round the body, and in order to sustain the speed that it's going at, it needs to have a high pressure, because otherwise it will slow down and it won't get around the body fast enough. So to create this high pressure, it has thick walls and it has a very small area inside, so everything's therefore compact and can squeeze through with a high pressure. We then have the capillary here. Now the capillary is the part of the vessels where your oxygen or your carbon dioxide will diffuse in and out of the body, well, of the vessels into the rest of the body or into the lungs, etc. So that's why this is meant to be a thin, one cell thick wall, and therefore allows it to diffuse because there's not much for it to get through. It has a kind of normal size centre. The last one we have here down the bottom is obviously the vein. Now the vein has a very kind of large area inside, and that therefore gives it a low pressure, because it doesn't need a high pressure. It's carrying deoxygenated blood, so it doesn't need to get it anywhere quickly. So that's therefore why it has its low pressure. Okay guys, so thank you for watching. Please post any questions below. I'm assuming they'll probably be about the first part of the video, because I know that was pretty terrible. I'm not very good at explaining that because there's a lot of labelling to do and I usually miss something out, as I did. So, but please, I hope this helped you, and please post any ideas below, any questions. I'll see if I can get them answered. I'll ask them to you myself. I'll answer them to you myself if I know you. If I don't, I'll post it in the comments. So thank you for watching, and I hope this has helped